Hey guys, how's it going? Preparing here. So Naxx is being released a few hours from now, well, the first wing, and on stream today I got a chance to look over all the cards which have been released. You can see photos, you can see all the stuff, not just the ones coming in the first wing in a few hours, but all of them, and you get a pretty cool idea on how amazing the game is going to be, and it kind of paints somewhat of a picture that a person like me who's played a lot of Hearthstone can understand at least to some level of how the cards will work, how they'll interact, the kind of decks, the kind of combos people will make, and I thought I would share with you guys my opinion now that I've had some time to think, some time to review on my original one, and give you guys some concrete ideas, at the very least, maybe inspire some decks or some combos in the decks you may choose to build. So here we are. I'm going to be doing these in the order of which the cards come out. So in the first week we get the Spider Wing. In the Spider Wing, by killing the first boss, you get Haunted Creeper, which is 2 for 1/2, and it has a death rattle to spawn 2 1/1 Spectral Spiders, which is 3/4 for 2 mana essentially, which is technically really good, but because 1/1s are fairly worthless and 1 attack is fairly worthless in Hearthstone, you kind of need to play this in a very aggressive, a very zooey kind of deck, which soon enough you'll see is not really going to be as good anymore. There are a lot of cards being introduced that have quite a lot of stopping power to weenie creatures like this one. The next one for killing the next boss that you get is Naxxramas Weblord. And before I go into this card specifically, I want to tell you guys a little bit ahead of seeing the rest of the cards, kind of the cards that I see people playing. So I think a lot of people will start playing Silences because most, actually maybe all the cards introduced have some kind of super annoying ability. And a lot of cards introduced actually have 2 or less attack. So because Kodo was a pretty good 5-drop already, I think just about every deck, and I mean every deck, is going to run even double Kodo. And third, because aggro does get punished quite a bit, a lot of people are going to run control decks. A lot of people are going to run death rattle cards because that's kind of like the new thing. And one card I see working with both with the control atmosphere and with the death rattle atmosphere is Death Wing. And what I thought was cool, maybe not too effective, but at least cool about the Naxxramas Weblord is that it's a card that stops someone from playing Deathwing, and it kind of screws up your opponent's turn, quite extensively in some cases. So I think that's what makes it pretty cool. I could see it used if the meta game does evolve into a lot of these control-y decks, especially if it involves Deathwing. Next card on the list, and this has received some attention in the past, is Rubian Egg. Now, Rubian Egg is a pretty good card, but you have to have a deck that it kind of fits. It's pretty good because it acts sort of like Kodo bait, so if your opponent is running Kodos and you have Kodoable creatures on the board, if you throw this out there, he might think twice because instead of punishing you with a Kodo, he might improve your board, which would really suck for him. Also, if you have a lot of board clears, Warlock makes good use of this. If you're running Argus anyway and kind of like a zoo deck, if you can pump it to a 1/3 taunt, it does something, it becomes something else. You can power overwhelm it, so you do 4 direct damage with a power overwhelming, and then for 2 mana you get a 4/4, so very efficient in that regard. If you're running Void Terror, you can do some cool stuff there. 2 more life to your Void Terror and get a 4/4 out of it. And even stuff like Hellfire if you really want. There are some cool combos. There is the possibility of playing the 4/4 on turn 1. If you're playing Rogue, you can coin this out and backstab it to get a 4/4 for 2 cards, which on turn 1, considering you're probably playing a pretty tempo-heavy deck, if you have this kind of arrangement, I would assume it would run pretty well. So lots of possibilities in this one. I don't know if it'll be played too frequently, but in the right deck, it's going to be cool to see. If you beat the whole wing, the legendary that you get is Maxnut, which is the Spider Bro. It's a 2/8, so it is Kodo bait, and if it does get silenced, it kind of sucks. For 6 mana, it's total 10 power, which is kind of like 4.5, 5 mana value. Considering you eat up the silence, that's fair, but 2 attack is pretty low, so this creature is, in my opinion, not so good in the classes that can't deal 1 damage or the decks that don't have a lot of buffs. But if you do have those, if you are running silent, if you're running like a mage or something like that and you have the buffs, I think this card will be pretty good, but I don't know, it's a little bit slow. There's better 6-drops out there. The next wing that's going to be available on week 2 will unlock the next set of cards, and the first one in the set is the Stoneskin Gargoyle. So the Stoneskin Gargoyle is a 1/4, and again it falls prey to the Kodo, it falls prey to the silence, because 1/4 for 3 is, Silverback Patriarch status. It is trash. So the benefit of this card is at the start of your turn, restores me into full health, which is pretty cool. I don't think this card will be played too frequently, maybe in some combo decks, maybe just so people will try. It's great if you can buff it. If you have like a Power Word Shield, if you double its health, you inner fire it, suddenly it becomes an unstoppable killing machine. You can also, if you have this out, you can maybe play a Northshire Cleric, heal another minion, and if this is still alive at the end of your next turn, draw another card. A little bit of a combo action. The best interaction that I saw with this card is perhaps playing it late game on a Paladin, maybe having it survive the turn and doing something like, King's Faceless on the next. Because if you do manage to King's this bad boy, he becomes a 5/8 that heals to full at the start of your next turn, which is pretty ridiculous. But if you Kings a few other creatures in the game, they're pretty crazy as well. So yeah, pretty subpar, but it will win some games spectacularly. The Unstable Ghoul is one of the cards I was talking about that's like really anti-aggro. Doing 1 damage to all minions and being a taunt and just being generally super annoying is fairly powerful against a lot of the Zoo decks that we'll be seeing and that we see today. So if Zoo does get out of control, people will start running this card and people will stop running Zoo, which I like. Sludge Belcher. Sludge Belcher may look kind of bad. It's a Sen'jin for 1 extra mana. If it gets silenced, it kind of sucks, but if they silence it, they're using up a little bit of extra mana value as well. I think it's a really good card. One, because in my opinion, Fen Creeper is almost playable in Constructed. It's almost as good as a Druid of the Claw and Taunt, which often is the way it's played, especially in control matchups, which I think we'll be seeing a lot of. And if you compare it that way, it's 4/7 with Taunt for 5 combined, and that is very, very powerful. Often the idea of not having it all at once is kind of bad, but because it spawns a taunt after a taunt, it kind of stops 2 attacks. And in some cases against big creatures or against shit like Leroy, for instance, that might be quite an advantage. So I think this will be played, though not quite as frequent as the other 5-drops like Azure Drake, and we'll be seeing Kodo time. The legendary that you get for the second wing, the second week, is, in my opinion, the best card released in all of the Naxx set, and it's Loatheb. Loatheb is 5/5 for 5, and enemy spells cost 5 more next turn. And I thought of making a deck that plays, all 4 pandas, another rogue card that returns a creature to your hand when it dies, and Shadow Step, just so you can play this specific card every single turn. This will make the coin cost 5 mana. This will make prep cost 5 mana. What are you going to do? 5 mana backstab, 7 mana eviscerate? It completely screws up decks that really take control or take back control of the board with spells. And right now that's a lot of decks. So this card is absolutely insane. I honestly think this card will be in every single deck once it's released, without exception. This is probably one of the best cards in Hearthstone. So you're not going to see any card that I'm going to show you topping that, but there's quite a few cool ones still coming up. In the third wing, The first boss drops you Dancing Swords. Dancing Swords, in my opinion, is a really good card because if you play like the mill type of deck with Cold Light Oracles, with Muklas, especially if you play Paladin with Divine Favor, you know, you can get that card back, or you can mill them 4/4 for 3 in an aggro deck where you don't really care how many cards your opponent has is also good. So you might see this in like Zulok. And you can silence it if you really want because, well, a lot of decks are going to be running silence, and if you don't have a target for your opponent and you want to outdraw him, you can just silence this little creature. 4 toughness for 3 isn't really the best if you're playing against like a mage. You know, their 2-drop with 3 attack can often kill it plus a hero power, so it's not always going to be good, but if you play around it, I think in general it will be quite effective, and we will see this card used in a few decks. Card after that is the Spectral Night, which is probably up there among the better cards released in the set. It's basically a fairy dragon on steroids. It's a 4/6, and if you can land like a taunt on this thing through a Defender of Argus or something like that, you're going to get some ridiculous value. I mean, if you pump this to a 4/7 taunt that can't be targeted, you know, it's taking out at least 2 cards, possibly 3 or 4, if you can get some heals or more buffs on it through other creatures. So it's extremely powerful. I mean, it's 10 stats for 5 mana, which is solid, and that ability really screws up a lot of decks. So I do see this card being played in the 5 slot quite a bit, and we have already seen quite a few good 5 drops plus the introduction of the old Kodo time. Then we have the Death Lord. I think the Death Lord kind of sucks. Your opponent gets a minion when this guy dies. It's 2/8 for 3, which is, you know, essentially something that you'd normally pay 5 mana for, but because 2 attack is kind of low, it's kind of shitty. It's not quite Mogushan Warden status because 2 attack is a lot better than 1, and on turn 3, 2 attack is a lot better than 1 attack on turn 4, certainly. But because of the Death Rattle, in some cases it can be good because it nullifies a battle cry, like you might be able to nullify a silence, or, you know, maybe like a Peacekeeper if you're lucky. But in general, I don't see this card being played. It's far too risky, especially in a control matchup where you might pull out like a Ysera, Ragnaros, Deathwing, or something, you know, absolutely ridiculous. And if aggro does seem to be still the dominating force in Hearthstone, well, we'll be seeing this card. But other than that, I think this guy will be on the shelf. The legendary for this one is Baron Rivendare. I still don't really know how successful this card will be. By itself, it's pretty much garbage. It's pretty much a Mogushan Warden, where it does have taunt, because if you play this, your opponent will not want you to keep it. But, I mean, it really relies on how successful the Death Rattle type of deck, or how many of the Death Rattle cards work into standard decks, and that will really dictate how useful this card is. And at this time, I can't really predict that. There are some really fun combos with this, especially ones that follow through multiple turns. For instance, you can do like Soul of the Forest, and then if you draw this guy, you can play him and get like 2 trees instead of 1 for each creature that dies. So some cool stuff like that, and this kind of combos with a few other cards that you'll see shortly. Week 4, we get Wing 4, and Wing 4 has quite a few cards here. The first one in the set is Undertaker. Undertaker is a pretty damn good 1-drop. The problem is that for 1/2 it dies to pretty much every 2-drop. But if you do run a lot of Death Rattle cards, and probably the Death Rattle deck, or at least, you know, even things like Loot Hoarders or a few other cards, might trigger this. So it's certainly better than a Secret Keeper, and I think it's possibly a lot better than a Secret Keeper. Putting this on 1, putting more Death Rattles, maybe Leper Gnomes, maybe Loot Hoarders or some shit like that, can, you know, really start rolling the ball in an aggro type of game. So it's some potential, but not really too sure how far it'll go. Mad Scientist, in my opinion, is one of the best cards that's being released here. It's 2 for a 2/2, but the Death Rattle puts a secret from your deck into the battlefield. And it's not like you draw, it's not like drawing a card, it's like drawing and playing a card. And obviously the effectiveness of this Death Rattle is relative to the power and the mana cost of the secret. And this really hits a point with like Mage, for instance. Mage, soon you'll see the card that they're getting, the class-specific cards. They're getting a card when a creature dies, you put 2 copies back in your hand. I don't know how that'll work. I don't think it'll trigger off of itself. But even still, if you can manage to just pump out a bunch of secrets, play a bunch of these guys, you know, each Mage secret is 3 mana. Even if you're hitting like a mirror entity, the value is off the charts. And that's especially true because most 2-drops are pretty much 3/2s, and those that are 2/3s or something like that, you can often just Mage power down. So basically you can count this as like, if you're a Mage, you're playing a secret. So it's like you're getting a 3 mana discount. So this guy costs -1 mana. He's a 2/2, and you draw the secret. So he's basically -1 mana cost, 2/2 draw card. And I mean, those numbers speak for themselves. Zombie Chow. Zombie Chow is a pretty shitty looking card. If you're playing Zoo, if you're playing a bunch of 1-drops, you kind of care not to heal your opponent. But there is some room for this card, although I think it's a bit of a stretch to play in a Priest deck, because in a Priest deck you kind of just try to survive the early game, and in the late game you use cards to combo and kill your opponent, often quite suddenly. And this card sort of fills that role. I mean, you can just drop it out on turn 1 to, you know, have your opponent coin out a 2-drop or something like that. 3 health, the 2/3 often for a Priest is better than a 3/2, just because the higher health allows you to possibly be able to heal it. But the real cool combo is to have these puppies out, maybe 1, maybe 2, when you do an Auchenized Soul Priest Circle Heal combo to clear the board, which will also end up killing the Zombie Chows, but instead of healing your opponent for 5, they will deal 5 direct damage to the face, because the Auchenai will flip the healing into damage. So there's some cool combo stuff, and I'm really hoping people take advantage of that, but it's a bit optimistic. Wailing Soul. This may not be the best card in the set. It's definitely quite amazing, but I think it's the most interesting card. It's certainly my favorite card of the set now that I've looked at it and thought about it. So Wailing Soul silences all your other minions when it's played, when it's triggered its battle cry. And it's 4 for a 3/5, which is fair. That's, you know, for a battle cry creature, that's basically Sen'jin / Chillwind status. And this has some ridiculous combos. You can use stuff like Ancient Watcher, for instance. You can do turn 2 Ancient Watcher, turn 3 coin Wailing Soul, and then your opponent is basically screwed. The problem with the other silences is that they're kind of weak. Like even Spellbreaker, 4/3 for 4, that can die to a 2-drop. It can die to even a 1-drop in some cases. So yeah, Wailing Soul 3/5 is a lot more solid, and it silences all your other minions. So if people start playing Control, people start playing a Freeze Mage, well, you just put Wailing Soul in your deck, and when they freeze your board and they think you're safe, you unfreeze your entire board and you kill them. There's other combos like with Equality. You can Equality and then silence all of your creatures, so the Equality effect is removed. But when you do that, you actually fully heal all your minions. So it will be like a ridiculous combo where not only do you put all your opponent's health to 1, all your creatures get fully healed. And yeah, they get silenced, but you know, if you build the deck around it, it should be fine. It also works with the Dancing Swords cards, which you just saw, the 3 mana 4/4. When it dies, your opponent draws a card, which is an okay ability if you're running Divine Favor, Equality, both Paladin, good stuff. It also works pretty well with Crazed Alchemist and some other injured creatures. When you Crazed Alchemist the creature and then silence it, it does fully heal it. And it'll work with things like Injured Blade Master, for instance. You can flip an Injured Blade Master and then silence it, and then you have 4/7. So a lot of cards, a lot of combos, really, really cool stuff. Love this card. Part of the legendary cards in this wing They work a little bit differently. You get Stalag, you get Fugen, and you get Thaddeus. And these 3 cards are pretty interesting. Stalag is 5 mana for a 7/4, which is kind of garbage. 7 attack, 4 health is bad because of the 4 health. It can die to 2-drop and a hero power, or, you know, just like Frostbolt, or just the Flame Strike, or just about anything, really. 4 health is not really enough for a typical 5-drop, so it's a little bit weak on that end. The Death Rattle is cool, and I'll get into that in a second. Fugen, however, is 5 for a 4/7, which is amazing. And if people start running Control, and even in some other decks, especially ones that run things like Argus and Sun Fury Protector, I think we're going to see Fugen just because of the stat weights. And because people are going to run Fugen, if that is to such a frequency, other people may begin to run Stalag. And the reason that is because the Death Rattle of each of these creatures is that if the other had died previously in the game, you summon Thaddeus on your side, which is an 11/11 creature. So if everyone is running Fugen but not Stalag, and you're running Stalag, after their Fugen dies, you can play Stalag, you can just kill it off, and bam! 11/11, there you go. So you just snipe Thaddeus, pretty much. There's a few other interesting things where what happens if Stalag kills Fugen, or if they both die in the same trigger, like a Deathwing or something, who gets Thaddeus? I don't know if there's any confirmation on the answer, but I can say that either both players get Thaddeus, or neither player gets Thaddeus. And I'm kind of hoping that both players get Thaddeus, even though I think that's the least likely result of that interaction. But cool stuff nonetheless. The last wing, week 5, it only has 3 cards because it only has 3 bosses. The first is Echoing Ooze, which is 2 mana for a 1/2 with a battle cry to summon an exact copy as me at the end of turn. This only triggers once. Some people may be under the mistaken belief that it keeps on triggering at the end of every turn. It does not. It's a battle cry. It triggers only once. The idea is that you can use Echoing Ooze and then use an immediate buff on it to make it follow up again. So you can do something like Echoing Ooze and then Kings, and then you get 5/6 times 2 for 6 mana, 2 cards. Pretty good stuff. It kind of encourages people to use buffs, and buffs in general kind of blow in Hearthstone. So it's kind of nice to see, and hopefully people will take advantage of this card. But 2 mana for 2/4, which is the total power, is also not too bad, but because it's spread across 2 creatures and each has 1 attack, yeah, again, we're talking about the really, really aggressive zoo decks that might fit this in. I don't think this is really that great of a card. The next is Shade of Naxxramas, which is 3 for a 2/2 stealth, and at the start of your turn it gains +1/+1. It's at least good because pretty much generally in the worst case, you play this, your next turn when you want to attack with it, it's 3 mana for a 3/3 that your opponent couldn't target the first turn. So it's quite fair. In the more interesting case, you save this puppy up, you stall the game, and eventually you have a creature that kills the opponent in 1 hit. Perhaps you do something like continuously buff it up, or Faceless right before it's time to go, or Wind Fury, or yeah, lots of cool stuff. I don't know if it'll replace things like Leroy when you just go all out in 1 turn rather than from stealth going in, but yeah, we'll see. The last card of the wing is Kel'Thuzad himself, 8 mana, 6/8, which is fair stats, and at the end of the turn summon all friendly minions that died this turn. Now, the reason I think this might not be as crazy as it looks is because if people play Control, people will play the don't let your opponent have a single creature type of game. If you have an empty board, this card sucks. If you're really behind and you're in that situation where you just need to gain health or play a taunt or just do something, this card pretty much sucks. It's good when it's back and forth, even if you attack with just 1 creature. If you have like a Druid of the Claw, you attack into something and it trades and you play Kel'Thuzad, that alone makes it worth it. But because it's 8 mana and because it relies on a situation, it kind of falls into that category of legendaries that are really powerful, but you just hardly get a good chance to use them. So we'll see how powerful Kel'Thuzad is really going to be. that's all the neutral cards. Each class gets one class-specific card, and we'll look at those real quick. Druid gets Poison Seeds, destroy all minions, and summon 2/2 Trance to replace them. I think this card is bonkers. I mean, you can play this as a Druid and then Innervate Kel'Thuzad to get all your shit back if you want. It also gives Druid hard removal. It gives them a board reset with this and like Starfall or something like that. And it allows Druid to play a lot of small creature decks, because if you destroy your creatures and get 2/2s, your creatures may be like 3/3s, 2/2s, or some other shit like that already, when in the control meta game that I think will start to pop up, you know, you might be Trenting their Ragnaroses and shit, which is always very fun. Next card is the Rogue One, a Nubar Ambusher. The Death Rattle is return a friendly minion to your hand, but it's 4 for a 5/5, so it beats out every other 4-drop in terms of stats, and it allows you to perhaps like Leroy twice if you want. It allows you to extend the reach of your Lothebs if you want to Lotheb, suicide this guy, and return Lotheb to your hand to continue griefing your spell-heavy opponents. So very, very cool combos. If you're not running a creature-heavy deck, 4 for 5/5 is about as good as it gets, so I'm really pleased with this card. The Warrior card, Death's Bite, it's a 4 mana weapon, 4/2. It's kind of like a True Silver in that sense, and I think that's really powerful because the current 4-drops for a Warrior kind of suck. I mean, Kurkron Elite is very rarely good on turn 4, and often when you play him, you just go face and he dies the next turn anyway, so you might as well just Death's Bite. But it's a little bit better than that because of the Death Rattle of the weapon does 1 damage to all minions. You can kind of combo this. You can time your second swing on the following turn when you play like an Acolyte to get an extra card out of it, or with Armor Smith to get a bunch of armor out of it. There's a lot more combo potential, and it puts Warrior in more of a mid-game type of range. Paladin card, Avenge. When one of your minions dies, give a friendly minion +3/+2. Yeah, it's okay if you are just rushing your opponent down, but in general, especially in the control game, I think this card just kind of sucks. I mean, yeah, it's 3/2 power for 1, but it's a buff, and often your opponent can ignore it, and often when this happens, it's just not great. And I'm not too sure how the interaction will be when your creatures get Flame Strike, for instance. So if all your creatures die at the same time, this secret should trigger and then fail to find a target. So it may be some kind of scenarios where it fizzles out. So I don't know. I think it sucks. I was hoping for more for Paladin. Duplicate is the Mage secret. I thought this card originally was terrible until the Mad Scientist card, which puts secrets into play automatically, came in. And if you can trigger this on that, well, you are in business. So yeah, there are some extreme combo possibilities with it, and we'll see just how far they go with this card. Voidcaller, Death Rattle to put a demon from your hand onto the battlefield. 4 for a 3/4. Seems kind of weak, but you know, possibly some use. I just don't see Warlock being that mid-game class. I don't think the cards really favor Warlock among other classes for this role, and this is kind of like a mid-game-ish play. Obviously, this will make cards like Doomguard not have its battle cry of discarding 2 cards from your hand, but it's kind of like investing in a future turn, and that's not what's working out for Warlock right now. So I'm not too sure about this card. We'll see. Shamans get a ridiculous card called Reincarnate. Destroy a minion, then return it to life with full health. The reason this is pretty interesting is because it allows you to force kill a card when you want on your turn, so you could trigger things like Ancestral Spirit, for instance. You can perhaps combo this with Baron Rivendare. So think about it. If you had like a Cairn on board and he survives the turn, you can do something like Ancestral Spirit, Baron Rivendare, and then Reincarnate. And then you pretty much fill up the board with Cairns. So there's some crazy bullshit that you can pull off, and that's what I liked about Shaman to begin with. So more crazy bullshit to come. I'm excited. Dark Cult is a priest get. It's a 3 for a 3/4, which just the stats make it a very good creature. The Death Rattle, not so great, because if your opponent is attacking into you, which often is the case with Priest, by the way, they're going to kill your other creatures first before killing this guy. The Death Rattle is giving your other friend, I think it's supposed to be a random friendly minion 3 health, but it doesn't say that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it does, and it's often, in my opinion, going to fail to do that, but nonetheless, it's a good card. I don't know if it beats out Injured Blademaster for a 3-drop in Priest, but we'll see. A lot of things are going to change. This might be one of them. This is the Hunter card, Web Spinner. Death Rattle, draw a random beast card. It's a piece of trash. And that concludes all the Naxx cards. Hope you guys enjoy it. There's a lot of cool stuff that's going to come about these next few weeks, especially because these cards are not coming up all at once. I've kind of painted the picture of what happens when they all come out at the same time, but in the gradual sense, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be a lot of stuff. I'm going to love it. If you haven't checked out Hearthstone by now, there's no better time. Hope you guys enjoy the game as much as I do, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.